I want to provide a little bit of a framework for all of you to think about the huge set of challenges we're going to face in the energy sector over the next several years, and the challenges that President Obama, but really all of the American public is going to face. Let me start with what the science is telling us. And I think one of the things that's been very, very clear in the appointments that have been made is that science is going to have a premier position in terms of everything that this administration does. And there are some extraordinary scientists that have been appointed already or nominated, and of course, most notably, our new energy secretary is going to be the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Steve Chu, who has been working very hard with it in terms of his leadership of the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory on all of these technologies. But then secondly, of course, Dr. John Holdren, originally at Berkeley, now more recently at Harvard, is going to be the White House the White House Science Advisor, but has spent most of his time in recent years focused on energy and climate issues. And what the science tells us, and what I think is clearly going to be put very much in front of the new president, is that the changes needed in terms of the reduced emissions trajectory we're going to need to get on are much more dramatic than anyone in this country has been contemplating up until now. This new State of the World report we put out this week includes a new scientific assessment by a scientist at the Potsdam Institute in Germany, which concludes that we're going to need to go globally to an 85% reduction in emissions by 2050. What that means, essentially, is that to avoid some kind of a catastrophic tipping point where we end up with runaway climate change that goes on for centuries and is very hard to reverse, we're going to have to largely reinvent the energy system over just the next 4 decades or so. A very, very dramatic challenge. I would argue, arguably one of the largest challenges that this economy, or indeed any economy in the world, has ever faced. There is a large, large gap, clearly, between the kinds of goals that have been talked about politically, even including the president's goal of cutting emissions back to 1990 levels by 2020, and where we ultimately need to be just a few decades after that. And I have a feeling, I mean, again, assuming that the new president and the country as a whole start to listen seriously to scientists, we are going to find that the pressure for change to really reinvent almost all elements of this energy system are going to be larger and larger over time. The other thing that is really, I think, really important but somewhat difficult to get your head around, is just how different the circumstances are today as opposed to where they were 5 years ago in terms of what kind of change is possible in the energy system. And the reason is that there has been an incredible amount of change underway. There, of course, has been tremendous growth in the wind industry, the solar industry, several different kinds of solar technologies, as we've heard, a variety of bioenergy technologies. We have been in just a huge wave of innovation and unprecedented growth across these sectors. Now, up until this point, these new areas of investment, of technology improvement, have not reached the point where they are making a huge dent in terms of meeting energy needs or in terms of reducing emissions. But, and I think this is the important thing, they are now up to the point where we're on the verge of some really dramatic breakthroughs. And the essential dynamic is this. When you've had 10 or 15 years of close to uninterrupted 25% annual growth in a sector, as we've seen in the wind industry, you're on an incredible learning curve. You know, it's been documented for a long time with manufactured products. As the scale of production goes up, the cost goes down, technologies improve, not in a sudden way, but in a very steady way. And that is very evident in terms of where we are with wind technology today compared to where we were a decade ago. Both in Europe and in the U.S., we're adding more wind than we are either coal generating capacity or nuclear capacity already. And of course, again, there's a huge sort of financial engine improvement in technology that's going on with that. And we see overall roughly $150 billion has been invested, a figure that has increased roughly threefold just in the last 4 years. There is this sort of incredible convergence where you have an administration coming in Washington with a very different set of priorities, but they also have a potential to realize great things because the industries and the technologies are sort of teed up and ready to go. And that's the big difference from, you know, what we experienced back in the early 1980s. There was a rush of enthusiasm. There was an awful lot of interest in getting some of these same areas going. But in retrospect, we can see that the technologies and the industries were just not there yet. They were not ready to go. That is dramatically changed today and sort of sets us up for, I think, a period of real transformation, to use the President's words, in the next couple of years. One important element of this, and I think of it as an opportunity, but you know, many in the industry view it as a challenge, is to understand that this is now, in a way that it's never been before, a global marketplace. And you know, it's still easy, I think, in some corners of the United States to sort of think that we're in, you know, some kind of a separate bubble here. But of course, while we were, you know, asleep on these issues and on these technologies over a good part of the last decade or two, of course, Europe has taken the lead and has become, you know, really the dominant player in a number of these technologies. Wind, for example, increasingly in photovoltaics. Certainly in a range of the energy efficiency technologies, where, for example, the Germans are literally now going for what they call passive houses that literally require no external sources of energy. But then more recently, of course, countries like China and India and a number of other developing countries are very much in the game. And I think one of the things that we really need to understand is that this is something that in effect cuts in two directions. If we're going to achieve what we need to in terms of really decarbonizing the economy, it is absolutely wonderful to see that China in particular is becoming a world-class player, is now up in the ranks of the top 2 or 3 in producing solar photovoltaics and producing wind turbines, only behind the United States in that latter category last year. Number 1 in producing solar hot water systems, beginning to improve its technology substantially. At some point likely to give Chinese leaders confidence that, in fact, they can begin to reduce their extraordinary dependence on coal